my name is Alexis Chada. Thank you for watching my presentation. I'll be discussing the evolution of the vertebrate nervous system and sensory organs as they transition from aquatic lobe-fin fishes to early tetrapods and amphibians. I'll explain how environmental changes drove these adaptations and highlight two examples, the Tiktaalik and the eastern red-backed salamander, to demonstrate how these sensory systems evolved over time. Moving from water onto land presented vertebrates with several major challenges. According to Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 3, animals on land had to overcome gravity, increased water loss, more energetically costly locomotion, and greater temperature variation. However, land also provided advantages. As we discussed in Module 3, air contains more oxygen availability than water, produces less drag, and offered vertebrates access to new habitats and food resources. These environmental differences changed how sensory systems functioned. Sensory organs that detected water movement became less useful, while vision, hearing, smell, and proprioception became increasingly important. The transition to land, therefore, requires changes not only in limbs and lungs, but in also how the brain received and processed information. The early stages of this transition can be seen in the ocelliform fishes. These animals were still aquatic and retained a sensory system of typical fishes. They relied on the lateral line system to detect water displacement and vibrations produced by prey, predators, or other animals. Their inner ears helped to maintain balance, while their eyes were adapted for viewing through water. They occupied shallow, vegetated, and sometimes oxygen-poor environments, so living close to the surface may have favored greater awareness of activity occurring above water. Although their nervous systems were still primarily aquatic, their increased muscular and internally supported fins required more coordinated neural control. This helped establish the sensory motor function that later tetrapods would use to control weight-bearing limbs. My first species example is the Tiktaalik, one of the best examples of the transition from the aquatic to terrestrial. They lived during the late Devonian period and inhabited shallow rivers where dense vegetation and low oxygen levels created new environmental challenges. These conditions likely favored animals that could better support themselves in shallow water and more effectively orient their heads while searching for prey or avoiding predators. Stewart and colleagues in 2024 found that the Tiktaalik had several skeletal adaptations that evolved before true limbs appeared, including modifications to the vertebral column that increased head mobility, improved body support, and strengthened the connection between the pelvis and axial skeleton. These features suggest that greater stability and more precise body control movements were already evolving in fin fishes before the transition to land. Downs and his colleagues in 2008 further showed that the Tiktaalik's brain case combined both fish-like and tetrapod-like characteristics. Its reorganized cranial endoskeleton and shorter hypomandibula likely increased head mobility while reducing intracranial movement, allowing the nervous system to better coordinate vision, balance, and feeding. As Dr. Vandenbrooks explained in Module 3, these changes represent an important step in the evolution of terrestrial vertebrates because they improved sensory processing and motor control before vertebrates fully adapted to life on land. Acanthostega and Acanthostega demonstrate that the transition to terrestrial sensory systems did not happen all at once. The Acanthostega was primarily aquatic. It retained the lateral line system and had limbs that were probably more effective for moving through vegetation or shallow water than for walking on land. The Acanthostega was somewhat better able to support itself in extremely shallow water or on land. As limbs began supporting more body weight, sensory information from muscles, joints, and tendons became increasingly important. According to Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 3, proprioceptors help tetrapods sense the position of the body and limbs. Muscle spindles detected changes in muscle length and contributed to reflex arcs. These reflex pathways allowed the spinal cord to make rapid adjustments to posture and balance. This was especially adaptive on land, where gravity constantly affected the body and poorly positioned limbs could cause an animal to fall or become injured. Reptiliomorphs became more consistently terrestrial than many earlier tetrapods. As they spent their time on land, their nervous systems became increasingly specialized for controlling terrestrial locomotion. The lateral line system became less important because it only functions when sensory receptors were surrounded by water. Instead, reptiliomorphs increasingly relied on vision, olfaction, hearing, and proprioception. As described by Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 3, proprioceptors provided constant information about body orientation. This information allowed the brain and the spinal cord to coordinate limbs more effectively against gravity. These changes were adaptive because land surfaces are more irregular than aquatic environments. Animals had to respond to rocks, vegetation, slopes, and unstable ground while maintaining balance and controlling body weight. Several important sensory adaptations evolved as tetrapods became more terrestrial. According to Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 3, tear glands and eyelids evolved to protect the eyes and prevent them from drying out on land. Hearing also had to change because sound travels differently through air and water. Dr. Vandenbrooks explains that the middle ear developed to amplify airborne vibrations and transmit them towards the inner ear, and also maintain balance and body orientation. Chemoreceptors also became increasingly internalized. The vomeronasal or Jacobson's organ developed a specialized structure for detecting chemical signals, particularly pheromones for mating. Finally, proprioceptors and reflex arcs also became increasingly important. They allowed animals to detect limb position, maintain posture, and respond quickly to changes in the terrain. Amphibians have further specialized their sensory adaptations. According to Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 4, Lis amphibians possess an operculum columella complex that transmits sound and vibration to the inner ear. Also within the inner ear, amphibian papilla and basilar papilla detect high and low frequency sounds. Many amphibians also possess green rods in their eyes. These photoreceptors have maximum sensitivity to blue light and may improve vision in dim environments. Different amphibian groups also developed additional specializations. Frogs have forward-facing eyes and powerful vocal abilities used in mating communication. Salamanders often have enhanced visual and chemical prey detection, and caecilians have reduced eyes but possess facial tentacles that detect tactile and chemical information. My next species example is going to be the eastern redback salamander. This lungless salamander lives beneath logs and leaf litter where low light makes chemical sensing more reliable than vision. As discussed by Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 4, salamanders have specialized nasolabial grooves that enhance chemoreception. Dolly and Bass in 1988 found that these nasolabial grooves are connected to the vomeronasal organ, allowing chemical cues to be collected from the environment and delivered to specialized sensory receptors. Sullivan, Madison, and Rohr in 2003 showed that the redback salamander can distinguish chemical cues from injured conspecifics and avoid areas where these cues are present. This helps them to detect potential predators. This adaptation likely evolved because chemical cues can persist on the forest floor, allowing salamanders to locate prey, avoid danger, and communicate when visibility is poor. Amniotes became more independent from aquatic habitats because their reproduction was no longer restricted to standing water. According to Dr. Vandenbrooks in Module 4, amniotes have involved increased nerve supply to the forelimbs, improving control and coordination on terrestrial environments. More complex limb movements required increased communication between sensororeceptors, the spinal cord, and the brain. Module 4 also describes the different sensory trends in synapsids and sauropsids. Many early synapsids were nocturnal and invested heavily in hearing and chemoreception. Their eyes were often dominated by rods and had fewer cones, leading to poorer vision. Sauropsids were generally more visually oriented and were dineural. They evolved stronger color vision with multiple cone types and often used visual signals to communicate. Lastly, snakes have some of the most specialized chemosensory systems. As discussed by Dr. Vandenbrooks on Module 4, snakes possess a highly developed vomeronasal organ that allows them to detect chemical cues in their environment. Their forked tongue continuously collects particles from the air and the ground. When the tongue is retracted, these particles are delivered to the vomeronasal organ, where specialized sensory receptors send information to the brain. Snakes also have fused transparent eyelids called spectacles that protect the eyes while maintaining their vision. These sensory adaptations likely evolved because snakes move closely to the ground, where prey, predators, and potential mates leave persistent chemical trails. Rather than relying primarily on vision, snakes use their highly specialized chemosensory system to navigate their environment, locate prey, avoid danger, and identify reproductive partners. These are the sources I used throughout my presentation. The information on the evolution of the nervous system and sensory organs across major vertebrate clades came primarily from the Module 3 and 4 lectures by Dr. Vandenbrooks. For my detailed animal examples, I used peer-reviewed primary research articles on the Tiktaalik and the eastern redback salamander. These studies provided experimental and anatomical evidence for sensory adaptations I discussed and helped explain how environmental pressures shape the evolution of the vertebrate's nervous system during the transition from water to land. Thank you for listening.